All right, picture this. Beverly Hills, 1989. Sun, glamour, and a shocking double homicide.
Inside a mansion.
You got it. And the prime suspects, the victim's own sons, Lyle and Erik Menendez.
That case is like a car crash, you can't look away.
It's wild, right? Even now, decades later, people are still captivated. Why this case? Why now? We're diving deep.
Well, cases like this, they get under your skin. They make you think about family secrets, the place of wealth, the darkness we're all capable of.
Exactly. It's like holding up a dark mirror, and we have this article revisits the whole thing with fresh eyes, new evidence.
Oh, really? This is what I gotta hear.
Yeah, it's a wild ride. But to understand it, we got to go back. Lyle and Erik, young guys, living the privileged life in Beverly Hills until that night they make the call.
The 911 call.
Yep. Find their parents shot dead.
And that's where it gets complicated, right? The defense, they claimed Lyle and Erik were victims themselves, pushed to this horrific act after years of alleged abuse.
Heavy stuff.
But the prosecution?
Uh-oh, they saw dollar signs. Cold-blooded murder, they said, driven by greed, pure and simple. A $14.5 million inheritance.
Talk about dueling narratives. And the media went crazy. A family shattered by violence or a scandalous spending spree by the brothers.
And legally, proving motive. It's crucial. But how do you prove that level of abuse? The kind that would lead someone to, you know.
And can wealth alone be a motive? Enough for life in prison? 2 hung juries couldn't decide? This case, it had the nation glued to their TVs. But ultimately,
Convicted.
first-degree murder,
Yeah.
life without parole. Seems like an open and shut case, right? Not so fast. Even with a verdict, some questions linger. And Lyle and Erik's story, well, it continued, even behind bars.
What gets me is after years separated, different prisons, they finally reunited. Can you imagine that? 2018, seeing your brother again after everything, after all that time, all those years. It's got to mess with your head, right?
Prison changes a person. Years of reflecting, maybe even changing, but within those walls. It's no wonder both brothers have talked about the murders differently than they did at trial.
A little remorseful.
Definitely. Even Lyle admitted, and I quote, "I'm the guy that shot my parents, and no river of tears has changed that, and no amount of regret has changed it." Powerful stuff.
Wow, that's heavy. But is it genuine remorse or just coming to terms with a life sentence?
Exactly. How much weight do we give to these later reflections? Is it true remorse, a reckoning, or a way to find peace within a life defined by this one horrific act? Tough to say.
It's like they're speaking a whole different language, one forged in the shadow of this enormous act.
And this is where the Menendez case takes another turn, because new evidence has surfaced, and it really makes you question everything.
Okay, now you've got me on the edge of my seat. What kind of evidence are we talking about? This is where I couldn't put the article down.
We're not talking about a missed clue or a new witness. This is about information coming to light now, years later, that changes how we see the whole story.
Okay, but what is it?
Well, there's this letter. Erik wrote it to his cousin Andy back in 1988, months before the murders.
A letter! Why are we just hearing about this now? Why wasn't it in the trials?
$1 million question. And it shows why this case is still so gripping, this letter. If it had been allowed in court back then, who knows what the jury would have done?
What does it say? What's so explosive about it?
Erik describes some disturbing stuff, talks about Jose's abuse, his own fear. He even writes, "He's crazy. He's warned me hundreds of times not to tell anyone." Chilling.
So it backs up their claims of abuse. But if it's that big, why wasn't it allowed in court?
Well, evidence has to meet certain standards, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be authenticated, relevant, can't be unfairly prejudicial. It's hard to say why it wasn't used then, but now it adds a whole new dimension to the brothers' claims. Claims the prosecution really tore apart back then.
It breaks your heart, you know, to think they might have suffered in silence. Maybe things could have been different if this letter had come out sooner.
It really highlights how tough it is to prove abuse, especially behind closed doors, within a family. Secrets and silence can be powerful weapons.
You said there's more to the new evidence, right? Something about Roy Rosselló?
Here's where things get interesting. Because Roy Rosselló, from the boy band Menudo.
Yeah, I remember Menudo. Wait, what's the connection here? Jose Menendez and a boy band.
It's not a professional connection. It's far more serious. See, Rosselló came forward in 2023.
Yeah.
Alleged that Jose Menendez sexually abused him.
Whoa, hold on. When he was a teenager.
Yes.
So this isn't just about one family's trauma anymore. It's like a pattern.
Potentially. And Erik himself said, "It's sad to know that there was another victim of my father." Think about that, to get that kind of confirmation after all these years.
This is a lot to unpack. I mean, does it change how we see what the brothers did? Their motives?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Because the murder is horrific. But then you have this picture of abuse. It's messy. It makes you re-examine what we think we know about justice.
Right. If those allegations are true, does it change everything?
It could. Even without a retrial, public opinion could completely shift. It makes us face some tough questions about justice and what we believe.
And we are ready to get into those questions because this new evidence, would any of this hold up in court all these years later? Could the brothers actually get a retrial? A retrial, can you imagine, after all these years?
Yeah.
Would that even be possible?
Honestly, it'd be a long shot. Just because there's new evidence doesn't mean you get a retrial automatically. The legal bar, yeah, it's pretty high.
So what would it take? What would the brothers have to prove to make that happen?
Their lawyers, they'd have to show that this new evidence, it's not just interesting, it's crucial. That it would fundamentally change the outcome of the original trial.
So not just, oh, maybe things would have been different. More like, no way the jury would have convicted them if they knew this back then.
Exactly. And that's the challenge. Because the prosecution, they built their case on those early actions. The spending spree, the cover-up attempts, those details. They don't just disappear.
Right. It's like trying to reconcile two completely different versions of the truth.
And that's what makes this case so fascinating and so difficult. On one side, you have the cold, hard facts of the crime. Premeditation, greed, a calculated act. But then
You have this other side, the abuse allegations, the possibility that these brothers, they were acting out of desperation, out of fear.
and it forces us to ask these uncomfortable questions about accountability, about the gray areas of human behavior. Because sometimes the people capable of horrific acts, they're also victims themselves.
You know, it's that saying, hurt people hurt people. Doesn't make it right, but it adds another layer of tragedy to the whole thing.
Absolutely. And it highlights this really complex truth. We like to categorize things, good and bad, victim and perpetrator. But real life, it's messy. And sometimes those lines get blurred.
So where does this leave us? I mean, the Menendez brothers are still in prison, right?
They are. And their lawyers fighting hard, using this new evidence to try and get them a shot at freedom. But will it be enough? It's still up in the air.
It's hard to know what to believe sometimes. This whole case, it's a whirlwind.
That's the thing about these landmark cases, the ones that stick with us. They challenge our assumptions, make us question what we think we know about justice, about truth, about the secrets families keep.
And this deep dive, man, it's really got me thinking. Because if we take everything that's come to light, the letter, the allegations against Jose Menendez, if we accept that as part of the bigger picture, does it change how we view this whole thing? Does it change what we think justice should look like?
You know, that's a question each of us has to answer for ourselves. There's no right or wrong answer, no legal precedent that can tell us what to feel.
No easy answers.
No, but that's the point, isn't it? To be willing to sit with the discomfort, to acknowledge the gray areas, because that's where the real conversations start.
The Menendez brothers case, a story of wealth, family, and violence that continues to fascinate and horrify even after all these years. It's a reminder that sometimes the most shocking crimes are just the tip of the iceberg. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been, well, let's just say it's given us a lot to think about.